All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I am David Ulloa, and we are here tonight to talk about Hereditary, Ari Aster's very first movie, which is kind of difficult to believe. This is a debut.
Hard to believe.
Yeah. So this is something that I don't know if it was your idea or my idea, Daniel, but someone said either Hereditary or Midsommar, and then the other guy was like, well, why don't we do a double feature?
Yeah, like you had mentioned we were due to do something supernatural and said Hereditary, and I brought up that I hadn't seen Midsommar, and I was like, let's just do them both.
Hell
and
yeah.
So next week, tune in to see Midsommar, and it'll be my first viewing of that one.
Yeah, and it does make for I think quite a nice double feature, since they explore similar themes but done in very different ways. So I am really excited to talk about this movie.
Me too.
This is, for reasons I don't understand, a divisive movie. People
I kept running into that too.
Yeah, they have very clear thoughts on this movie. They either love it or they hate it. I find that there's not really like a middle ground here. But critically, it's a critical darling, right? And this does appear on many of the scariest movies of all time lists.
Yes.
Considering that this movie came out in 2018, that's no small feat. And in fact, in reading up on the movie since it's come out, I've seen a lot of people claim that this is the scariest movie since The Exorcist. Now, a couple years ago, there was a study that was done that found Sinister to be the scariest movie of all time. Scientifically, it was the scariest movie of all time. Very much in the same way.
They had like people wear Fitbits and monitored heart rate and stuff like that, and they watched just a ton of movies.
Yeah, very similar to how they determined that Airplane was the funniest movie of all time. Laughs per minute. Airplane beat them all out. So I prefer Naked Gun.
I'll listen to that argument.
But yeah, I'm not going to argue with science. So not here, not on Shiver. So what do you think? Does this live up to the hype?
And so I think when you go to look at this movie, so from what I understand is I think that the hype machine that this movie built around itself is one of the reasons that it unjustifiably maybe gets some of that hate, because when you hype something as, the scariest movie of all time, and outside of one big shock, you're an hour into this before things get scary, right? And we're going to talk about the narrative. That being said, yeah, I think it absolutely lives up to the hype. This was the second time I've seen Hereditary when I sat down to watch it last night. And when I went into it the first time, I went into it blind. All I know is there's this movie called Hereditary. It's this new guy. People seem to love it. And so I watched it and had no idea what I was in for. And that was an amazing experience. So I was tentative about rewatching this because of the fact that I knew it wasn't going to have that new car smell anymore. I know what was coming up. But that being said, man, this movie is fucking terrifying. I think it absolutely lives up to all of that. I think that as we get into talking about the story and stuff like that, I think some of the things that that people give it flack for are the things that make it so good. I think that that when you look at this movie as a whole, what you find is a movie that is so deeply grounded and rooted in reality for so long in the movie that then there is no suspension of disbelief when you get to the shit that's insane.
Right.
And so you're so enveloped in how real and how raw this movie is that then when the horror comes at you, you're completely enveloped, right? Like you can go to a slasher movie and be like, okay, yeah, maybe it'll be scary, but I know a guy like that doesn't exist. A Jason Voorhees is obviously well beyond the realm of something you can consider to be possible. And they open it up and they immediately let you know that. When you watch this movie, you get so sucked in to a story that's so utterly relatable and just beautifully tragic that by the time things go wrong, there that veil of you separating you from the movie is gone, and that's what makes it so scary. So I 100% believe that it lives up to the hype. I think that comparing it to The Exorcist is an excellent milestone of how scary it is, because when The Exorcist came out, I mean there are still
There
plenty
was
of
nothing
people.
like it.
Yeah, there was nothing like it, and it delved into something that maybe people knew about, like demonic possession and stuff like that, but then to take it and put it on film, and then of course, like the trope of it being like this is based on a true story, this really
Right.
happened, people are possessed, like that's what The Exorcist had going for it. It had a sense of, this is rooted in the reality of religion, which is such a deep cornerstone of so many people's lives. This didn't give you that right away, so it made you understand, and then it got there, and then it was so shocking what happened. So I think that's an excellent comparison.
I think part of the reason why this movie is so divisive is we are so often given, like you said, movies that are either very much rooted in reality and very real, or movies that are very much supernatural. And there's very rarely any crossover. The fact that this movie explores such real themes, such relatable themes, and that the trauma that's experienced by these characters is so often trauma that we have experienced ourselves, and explores a fear that is inherent in all of us, which is our genetics, our DNA. You can't outrun your family history. You can't outrun your family trauma, right? Everyone has had that nightmare at least once in their life that their mother or their father is trying to kill them.
Yeah.
And that's a nightmare that never leaves you. It never leaves you. I still remember the one that I had when I was a child, and it was a recurring nightmare. And I know that when I told my mother, it utterly destroyed her.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I must have been, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years old when it happened. I've never forgotten it. Never. And so the fact that that's something that is universal, but then you bring in this element of the supernatural, it's hard for people to accept that, I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of like going into a Superman movie. We know that he can fly. We know that bullets bounce off of him, that he's got fucking laser beam eyes, and we're okay with that. We go into that and we totally accept that, right? But then you watch a movie like Skyscraper, which is more or less rooted in reality, and you're like, The Rock can't fucking jump that far. Right?
Yeah.
Why do we have a problem accepting that? Because it is more rooted in reality than most, right? So that's I think where the disconnect is between the people who did enjoy this movie and the people that did not enjoy this movie. For me, I would say that this is very likely the scariest movie I've ever seen for me personally. which is why this is only the second time I've seen this movie.
Yeah.
I saw this movie not when it came out, but when Midsommar came out. When Midsommar came out, I was like, "Fuck, it's been this long already, and I haven't seen Hereditary. I probably need to watch Hereditary." So I saw Hereditary, loved it. Saw Midsommar, loved it, and I haven't gone back to it because it's a painful watch.
Yeah.
It's very real, and it's arresting. I think is the way that I would describe it. So it's not the kind of movie that I rewatch, but it is the kind of movie that sticks with me.
I agree. Like, I think that one thing, what you're talking about, just things that you can't outrun. Like this movie, if it explores absolutely nothing else, this movie explores the fact that grief is a motherfucker.
Yeah.
Right. And that suffering can cause people to, it can really, really fuck with people's heads. And I think that's so guttural. And that's primal, like animals grieve. That's not even just a human thing. There are plenty of research into the fact that herds of animals will grieve.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're just faced head on with this movie that's like, what lengths would you go to?
I like that pun, by the way.
Faced
head on.
Yeah. What lengths would you go to have that one more moment? Mm-hmm. Right? If you have never had somebody pass in your life where they were so important to you that you just constantly kind of relive the past couple times that you saw them, and you wish that you had one more moment because there was just something, or the last time or last couple times they didn't seem significant, and you want that one more time. Then if you've never experienced that, then the power to you, good for you, incredible, because that is an unbelievably dark place to be in. And this movie confronts that. And it makes you sit there and watch when you see the lengths to which a mother will go because she is so grief stricken, and you get so sucked into that like you said, right, that separation between a movie that's based in reality and that's not. They as we talk about the story of this film, the what you have here is a movie with 1,000 moving parts. Yeah. And it's easy for us to be like, yeah, we do a horror movie podcast, we're going to do Hereditary. Like, that is a horribly scary movie. But this movie is equal parts horror, psychological drama, or family drama, psychological thriller. There's a little bit, there's a lot going on here. And so when you're faced with all that, you just got a lot to process, and there's so much going on at times you can't process from one thing to the next, and it becomes overwhelming. So when you're looking at so much being, this movie, it was what, 2 hours 4 minutes, 2 hours 8 minutes, something like that.
It's not that long.
It's not ridiculously long for as much as packed in there. How do you think having so much in there helps or hurts the movie experience?
I think that what this does for the viewing experience is it creates an incredibly tense environment that doesn't ever let you sit comfortably in your chair.
Yes.
You're always sitting like bolt upright, and you're like, I found myself, even after having seen this movie again, sitting up in bed. I was watching this in bed, and I was sitting up in bed. Like, I wasn't laid back on my pillows and relaxing, and my palms were sweaty.
Yeah.
My palms were sweaty. I was starting to like hyperventilate watching these scenes, anticipating what was coming up. And I already knew what was going to happen.
Exactly.
And then as these scenes reached their apex, like there was no release. That's the thing, is that tension, like, it's not like you can pop it with a balloon, because you put that needle to it, and the needle goes right into the balloon, and that balloon just keeps expanding.
Yes.
There's never a release in this movie. Never. Not even as the credits begin to roll.
No, and they just play like creepy music, and
And I think that all the different moving parts in this story, like you say, are brilliant, and it's what keeps you from focusing on one thing for too long.
Right.
Because as is real in life, right? We have all these distractions, right? So one of the things that I was thinking about today is, whose story is this really? Is this Annie's story or is this Peter's story?
That's a good question.
And I still don't know. Is
Yeah.
it Annie's story told through Annie's eyes, or is this Peter's story told through Annie's eyes?
That's
And
a really good point.
and that's one of those things where since I started thinking about this on my drive home, and I'm like, fuck, and all it's done is fuck with me ever since then.
Yeah.
Like, why can't I answer this question? You know, I'm a fucking literature teacher. I should be able to answer this question, right? And ultimately, I think that this is Peter's story told through Annie's eyes. If you have to ask me, and I have to give you an answer, I think that that's what this is. But there's so much of everyone in this movie. Like, Charlie is always present.
Yes.
Always present in this movie. Is it Ellie or Ellen, the grandmother?
Oh, let's oh, I'm not seeing her name all of a sudden. I had it pulled up here, but I don't see her.
She's omnipresent.
Ellen.
It's Ellen. Yeah, she's never not present.
And you never
You never actually
see her
meet her.
alive in the film.
No. And so their influence is there in the story this entire time. One of the things that I loved was in the house, and it's just off, little bit out of focus. There's one shot where it's kind of really in focus. One of Annie's miniatures, just next to the stairs, it's not in her workshop. It's next to the stairs.
Oh yeah,
on
like
the
right
first
beside
floor.
the stairs. Yeah.
Yeah, it's layers of houses.
Yes.
One on top of the other. And it's so symbolic of the story, right? Where really what this story is about, if you want to, synthesize it to its very core, right? Is it's about what is handed down to you from your parents, from your ancestors, right?
Yeah.
Because Annie is given the curse that Ellen gave her. Who knows what Ellen was had inherited from her parents, right? And Annie ultimately is the one who curses Peter, So it's really, the title of this movie is much more important than you think going in.
Yes.
Right? I mean, and even so, like horror movies, so often we think like, oh yeah, Friday the 13th. It's just, whatever, that one fucking statue is so indicative of what this story is really about. And there's so much of that going on everywhere in the movie. It reminded me of watching like one of Mike Flanagan's TV shows, where there's just like little bits everywhere. And the more you watch it and rewatch it, the more you're like, oh shit, look at that. I didn't see that last time.
Yes.
And you start picking up on all these little things. The story is the thing that drives you to analyze this movie and apply this movie to yourself, to your psychology, and what allows this movie to live beyond the screen. And I think that is the most powerful thing that a movie can do, is be so affecting that it causes us to say, hey, we got a podcast. Let's talk about this.
Yeah. Today. No, you're absolutely right. Like on so many levels, but It's so amazing. Like I said, I was nervous about rewatching, right? But like you've said, Nat, like you just said, this movie, because the story is so good that you can miss things like, you know, the house next to the stairs and stuff like that, because you're just so engrossed in what's going on. So one thing I did know, since this was a rewatch, was I was aware of the fact that this movie is a family drama. I mean, it's a straight up family drama for a good while. So I was making a very conscious effort to say to myself, okay, the first time that is certifiable, the first time something certifiably supernatural happens, I'm going to catalog that moment. It was an hour and 4 minutes in, is the first time that you see something supernatural happen. Before that moment, you are just watching a family drama. You're watching the story.
What was that moment, by the way?
It was when she goes with Joan and does like the little seance for Joan's son, and the glass moves. When the glass moves out from under her hand, it's at an hour 4. Like, I paused it. I was like, all right, that is the first thing that I would consider like a certifiably supernatural thing.
Oh, like you can't argue it, sort of thing.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah. Like there were a couple moments with Charlie, like where the light, you know, like that weird shimmer and stuff like that, you know, and that can all kind of be chalked up to one thing or another. But the glass moving by itself, like I said, certifiable, that's a supernatural moment. So that's at an hour 4. But leading into that, like I said, you get this family drama, and they're never painted as like this picture perfect family, you know, like
quite the opposite.
Yeah, you know, for all the things in this movie, like, what the fuck was Gabriel Byrne's job anyway? Like, was his job literally just drinking scotch and staring out rainy windows? Like,
I want his job.
Yeah, I can do that well.
But also, he's the only character that is no, I disagree, because everyone grieves in their own ways. I disagree with the thought that I didn't say out loud. I only thought to myself.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So people don't think I'm going insane here.
I actually am.
I am, but not for this reason. It's the end of the semester, and I've got so much work to do, and yet I'm here talking about Hereditary. So he is a character that is so tragic, because he exists outside the story, entirely outside the story, right? If this is a movie about what we inherit, right, our hereditary traits, right, he is totally outside of this.
Correct.
Because this comes from Annie's side of the family, right? As much as this is about the Graham family, it isn't.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about him or his name. It's about everyone else. And him trying to keep the family from falling apart is the most futile and I think the saddest of all acts that happens in this movie, because it's beautiful. And he is the character I most associated with in the movie. Particularly on the second rewatch, I saw a lot of myself in him. A character who is totally out of control, right? Not out of control in the sense that like he's, you know, running crazy, but has no control.
There we go. Yeah, has no control.
Yeah, a character who has no control and in fact is irrelevant.
Yep.
And that's one of the saddest realizations that a person can have. And actually, it was H.P. Lovecraft who did this for me. To realize that we very likely do not matter. What we do on this rock floating in this one solar system, in this one quadrant of our galaxy, doesn't matter.
Which is even more inflated by the fact that Toni Collette, Annie, she as this story progresses, she views herself as a more and more important character in this whole phenomenon that's playing out in front of her. I mean, I wrote this in my notes. She literally looks at Peter at one point and says, "I'm the only one who can stop this."
Yeah,
like when the movie as a whole, you're right. You step back and you look at it and you're like, none of this matters. All of these people were pawns. And when it all plays out, you realize that nothing they did mattered, because they were all just being used. And so it's even more like that was a line that the first time I saw the movie was completely throwaway, right? Like, yeah, of course you are. You're the only, you've got the diary and you're the one who's going to be set on fire and all that shit. And then you watch it this time and it's like, oh my, like it, like on the second watch, hearing her say that is almost like a laugh out loud moment, because you're like, she's developed such a sense of self-importance about this whole thing, when she doesn't matter. Like, she's a means to an end, just like everyone else in this movie is a means to an end. The narrative here, the psychological aspect where we're talking about the dad, like the idea of one thing we talk about a lot when we do this podcast, when you're watching this movie, is because we watch a lot of these movies and we've seen a lot of twists, we've seen a lot of things happen. You always have that one inkling in the back of your head, right? That none of this is actually happening. You're always waiting for that one moment that's like the aha. In this movie, that moment that you're waiting for is when the dad goes up into the attic after she's seen the grandma's body, and you're like, fuck, he's not going to find the grandma's body up there.
And he screams.
Yes. And then he gets up there and he starts screaming and he comes down and he's puking, and you're like, holy shit, this is all really happening.
It's real.
And no longer is this just the grief-stricken mind of a mother who lost a child too soon. This is a very real fucked up phenomenon that is happening in this home.
But then they hit you with something that I did not see coming, which watching it again now, watching it through Gabriel Byrne's eyes. I forget his fucking name, right? But watching it through his eyes,
Steve,
right? Steve, that's right. Yeah. Thank you. He looks at her and he's like, you're out of your fucking mind. He's like, it was you. You are the one that took her out. When I watched this the first time, I was so in the moment that it didn't register, right? And I thought possibly because there was a moment in the very first seance that happens in the Graham home where she very clearly has the presence of payment inside of her, right? And she does again after that, right? So the first time watching this, I was thinking, well, maybe Payman never left, right? And maybe she has been doing all these things. If you were to ask me right now, I would say, no, I don't think so. I do think that it was, the cult, and I do think that they were the ones that were influencing this, and they were just using her.
Right.
But this breakdown that she's been having, that is 100% the logical thing to do. And I saw it come way out of left field the first time, and this second time I'm like, nah, Steve, you're like on the fucking money.
Yeah, right. Like that, and that's the thing. Like there's such an innate need to ground something to something to ground one thing that you don't understand to something else that you believe in, right? And so, like I said, I don't know what he did. Like at one point, he was reading in the dark. I don't, maybe he has superpowers, but so all of this is happening, and one thing that's really interesting, and this movie, I was talking about exploring the concept of grief and the fact that everybody grieves in their own way. It's interesting to see this character of Steve, who his grieving method seems to just be, look, it was tragic and it was awful, and we're going to live with that forever, but life has to go on. And so that's in my opinion, that's the headspace that he's in, right? He's like, we've got to move on from this. So he's constantly trying to talk her out of these things. And possibly more than likely the reason that she doesn't tell him she's going to support groups, because it seems like his grieving method is to move forward, right? Somebody always has to keep rowing the boat. And so there may have been some shame she felt in going to these support groups, or just feeling like she wasn't going to be supported at home for doing them, because she felt stuck in that moment.
She did say that she didn't think that she would get support at home.
Yes.
That one group that she does go
That's
to.
right. The first one, when she goes, when it's just her mom that's died.
Right.
And
but there's also a really interesting moment when Steve tells Annie, he says, I have a son to protect.
Yeah.
And she looks at him and she says, what does that mean? Right? Like, if she again feels blamed, right, for the sleepwalking where she nearly incinerated her children,
Right.
right? And she definitely has like this very defensive attitude, right? So I think that there's a lot of tension between them as husband and wife in this sort of like your grieving is your grieving,
Right.
but your grief ends where Peter's well-being begins.
There we go.
And so your trauma, your past trauma, right? Your inability to cope with your mother has been something that has affected this family before, right? We're never given the context of why she was sleepwalking before, what caused the sleepwalking to stop, and what brought it on again, right? So we assume that it's the stress and the grief that has started the sleepwalking again, but we don't know why it stopped in the first place. So it could be something like that, where it's like,
Right.
listen, I don't trust you.
And there's just, and so, as when you just look at this story as a whole and all the twists and turns it takes, and just everything that was committed to film to make this movie, like, this is up there with, I mean, this is right up there with Crimson Peak and the movies we've done, as this is, like, that really pretentious thing, like, oh, the film versus movies, but this is
Right.
this is a horror film,
Yeah.
right? Like, this is a story driven narrative that you are sucked into. You are genuinely concerned and wonder what's going on with all these people. You are brought in and made a member of their family. Just, you're an omnipresent member who's just along for the ride. And so when you look at the narrative of this thing as a whole, while I can see where there are people who walked into it like, oh, scariest movie of all time, and 45 minutes in are like, one scary moment's happened, which, by the way, let's just talk. The moment when her head dings off that light post, man, the first time that I saw, like, I had to pause the movie.
Yeah.
The first time I was watching this movie, and he's driving, and you were talking about sitting upright, and this movie is just one giant tense muscle. You're already tense because you're watching a 13-year-old girl, go into anaphylactic shock and suffocate, while her high brother is desperately trying to get her to the hospital fast enough. Like, it's already this insanely tense situation, and then boom, he stops the car. And I won't say never, you do eventually see it, but in that moment, you don't see it. You just know, holy shit, her head just banged off that light post. Yeah. Which, by the way, on a second rewatch, you notice there's an amazing scene when they're driving at one point and the camera's following the car until it hits that light post, and then the camera freezes and you watch the car drive off, and there's just this, I don't know, let's call it 6 seconds, that's nothing but a shot of a power pole. Yeah. And it's just sitting there, and it's like, first time through, I didn't think anything of that, right? And now you're like, God, that is fucking ominous and horrifying.
It's not just the post, though. The sign of payment,
yes,
is inscribed on the post.
Yes, it is.
Which upon the first watch, I noticed the scribble, but didn't know what it meant, didn't think much of it, but I knew this post is going to play a role somehow later, right? I did not know how important a role it was going to play, nor did I know how soon after that it would happen, right? Yeah.
And so, like, and so you've got, so there's that moment, and I mean, just every bit of air was sucked out of my lungs the first time that I saw that movie, and I like I said, I had a moment, and he stops the car, and he's just sitting there trying to cope with what he's done and what just happened. And it was like, even once he kind of decided, which, by the way, I think that the idea of him just driving home and getting into bed is one of the most realistic depictions of how fucked up shock can be that's ever been put on film. right? Like, because it's easy to watch it and go, oh, why would you do that? You call the cops, you go home, you wake somebody up. But that is a shock and a trauma. Like I just pray that no one ever has to experience.
My first time watching this, I thought, fuck, that's awful. Why would you do that? And the second time watching it, I was like, you know what? Yeah, that's real.
Yeah, that's
You
real.
know,
Like,
what do you do in that situation? You're a fucking 17-year-old kid, and you're high as fuck, right? You're in shock that your sister's just died, right? What do you do? And how do you tell your parents this?
And so you revert to, you know, it's a base instinct, right? You go home and you get into bed. You go somewhere. I can only imagine that at that point it's just autopilot, right? Like your brain is not doing anything at that point. You're pure central nervous system in that moment, and central nervous system is like this is the worst thing that could have possibly happened. You need comfort. And so like I said, just instinct. The car, you know, one of those things where the car just it basically just drives itself home, and he just goes and gets into bed. And things like that about the story. When you're, like I said, when you're this person who's going into a movie who's been told it's the scariest thing ever, things like that, I can see too much hype overselling that particular aspect and not understanding, you know, all of the world building that goes into the family drama that is the first half of this movie. So I think that story, and I think narrative, I think that more so than possibly any movie we've discussed on this podcast is the most important thing in this. You know, we do plenty where we're like, oh, well, this movie's about blood and boobs, and that's what puts butts in seats.
Right.
That's not what Ari Aster was after. He was after you getting so engrossed in this story that you didn't know where one thing ended and another began.
And one of the things that I think is pivotal to the story is the fact that Payman is a real, you know, in quotes, you know, depending on what you believe in, right? Payman is a real demon.
Yes, at least depending on what you believe in, but at least the idea of Payman exists outside the universe of this movie.
Right. In the Ars Goetia, the Lesser Key of Solomon, right? King Payman is described in depth. It's a grimoire that discusses, you know, a lot of the demons that are found in hell, right? And so this cult that's dedicated to Payman is based on extensive research that Ari Aster did into Payman and the people who follow him, what they believe. So that sort of realism, right? Spiritual realism. It definitely brings something to the movie. Now, Daniel, you are our resident occult specialist.
It is something that in the past couple of years has become a passion.
So tell us a little bit about this.
Okay. So when we're talking about the concept, you know, the idea of the fact that this is all grounded in very real research and some things like that. So the first time, this was another thing that I benefited from a second rewatch. The first time, so tense, always wondering what was going to happen, that I missed. I did miss a lot of things, or I didn't have this need to dive into some of these things because I just needed to see the story play out. So upon rewatch, I'm watching and I know where it's going, so I'm looking for those things. I'm looking for the scribbling on the post, right? I'm researching the words that are etched into the wall.
Yes.
and the pictures. So let me start off by saying this: whether or not you believe in anything, right? Like I do want to say this is I consider this that our official Shiver word of advice. Just don't fuck with seances and shit that you don't understand. because not believing that fire is hot won't keep you from getting your hand burned when you shove it on a burning log. Right. So whether or not you believe this stuff is real, whether or not it is real, like, just if you're not well versed in this, don't fuck with the stuff. Like, I read about this stuff a lot. I'm not taking college courses or anything, but I know enough that it's not anything I mess with. Like, and I like to consider myself decently versed in a lot of this. And so when you watch, so there we go. There's my little the more you know for this.
No,
episode.
I get you. Listen, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not a religious person. I don't even think of myself as a spiritual person. However, I did grow up with religion and spirituality, and I guess that's something that just doesn't leave you, right? And I don't know if it was a year ago, 2 years ago, I subscribed to Loot Fright, right? And I get so many cool things, and things that I don't need, some things I don't even want, but cool things nonetheless, right? And there was a really cool statue of Baphomet that came in one of these boxes, right? And I didn't think much of it at first, right? And my son, who he's played Doom with me,
right?
He's not afraid of demons or any of that sort of things. He's like, "Hey, that's pretty cool." I'm like, "That is pretty cool, right?" I came down one night, grabbed a cup of water or something, and I saw the statue of Baphomet sitting on my desk, and I was like, nope. Nope, it's not gonna happen.
Gonna box it up now.
Yep, gotta box it up, and I gotta, yeah.
And one of the things about this movie, when it comes to this idea, it's easy to, well, I say it's easy. I've never written a film. It's easy to write a movie about these things and to fall back on the real basic Christian ideas of demons that and demonology that's kind of in the zeitgeist, right? At least has been since The Exorcist. What's amazing about the demonology and the occultism that's in the movie Hereditary is how deeply researched it is, down to the fact that it would have been easy. It would have been so easy, so fucking easy to just say Beelzebub. Right? Oh, everybody knows Beelzebub. That's an easy one. Lord of the Flies. Gotcha. Boom. Got it. That's the easy way. But what he did was he took the time to make, maybe make you want to learn about these other things, but also to not only just use the name Payman, but to accurately depict so many things that are associated with King Payman. So often in this movie, when they're in Joni's house, when they're up in the attic and things are candlelit, things are all yellow, which is a color that is very heavily associated with Payman, as far back as things go. So, like, there was obviously the research put into this. I said that I started paying attention to the words. The words that are etched on all of those things are actual, like, historical ritual words, and they're all positioned in the movie, not only because they're real, but they're all positioned in places at times in the movie when if you know what these words mean, you can piece together this movie from basically beginning to end and realize how it's all one giant summoning ritual. So one of the first words that you see is Zazas. And I read this stuff. I've never heard it spoken to me. To anybody who may know, I apologize if I just massacre these words. That word has its roots in old black magic going back to the early 1900s. One of the first documented uses of that word, and I'm sorry if I get real nerdy here, people. One of the first documented uses of that word was Aleister Crowley using it in the desert as a summoning ritual. And so it essentially is just it's asking for the gates to be open. Like that's an introductory rite. It is. So when you first see that movie, it's right as shit starts to kind of get weird, and it's when things happen. So you see that, and it's like, okay, so now you're into an introductory. The one that I think is easiest to recognize, and because it's got a word in it that you're going to know, is at one point etched into the wall, you see Liftok Pandemonium, which literally translates to open chaos. It's the Southern in me here. It's essentially like, come on, y'all. Let's go, demons. Like, that's what Liftok Pandemonium is. Also, it's the capital of hell in Paradise Lost, if you're a Milton fan. So it is a word that is associated with this invocation ritual. And it happens, after some of the deaths and after some of these things start happening, where you do realize that there's going to be a supernatural edge to this movie. You see the triangles with they do circles with triangles in them in this movie, which from the best I could find kind of researching is that is kind of a take on the Circle of Solomon, which is one of a lot of different types of magical circles that exist. That's also where you get your pentagram and things like that. The hexagram of Solomon being another one that looks like a Star of David in a circle. But there is a triangle of Solomon that's similar to that. I mean, the amount of research that went into this and making sure that all of these things were not only real, but that they were depicted in an accurate way, to where if you were somebody who has read books about this, or you live your life according to these things, then even if you know a lot about this stuff, those moments don't take you out of this, right? Like, even if you know what these things mean, then you realize how purposefully and beautifully they're used. The symbol that they wear on the necklace that's drawn in blood above the grandmother's body is a symbol that is associated with King Payman. And so all of these things were just so expertly used, down to the fact that throughout the movie, the people who don't really know, like your Annies, I noticed this time through, there's not very often, but there is like an interchange of the words invocation and evocation within this movie, but never from somebody who's in the know, because while by Merriam-Webster's definitions, they're very similar words that are almost interchangeable, within the realm of magical rites, they mean very, very different things. And evocation is just being like, hey, come hang out, like, come be part of this, right? Like, we just want to talk to you. And invocation is inviting another power in to use your body as a vessel. And so that book that she has at the beginning that she's looking through, that's written in some other language, is an invocation book. And so if you are aware of the differences between those words, then you're immediately all in on the fact that this grandmother was into the idea of not only contacting demons or spirits or something from the other side, but asking it to be part of her and be part of her, as we come to find out, part of her family. And so it's there's so much that went into it, and it's all so masterfully done. Like, it just, for the listener, I sent Dave a picture earlier of like my workspace when I was getting ready for this episode, and I had like 3 open books and my laptop open to like a Wikipedia page. I found some really weird propaganda pamphlets and stuff on the internet while researching today. I mean, the stuff is out there, but it's interesting because on the surface level, it's easy to just find a couple of words here and there about it. But to find out how in depth the research must have been to put all of this stuff into different areas of the movie and to use them all accurately. The ants in many religions throughout time, like, ants have been used as like a portent. People have been sacrificed on ant hills because then the ants will then lead you to something, or they will guide you to where you should be going next in life. the idea of so many people in this movie being beheaded, the concept of if there is something trapped in you, that if the removal of the head allows it out. I think that one thing in this story that's fascinating is if there is this idea that the grandmother did invoke Payman and brought him into her, that then she's killed as she dies. So with her death, Payman cannot escape. So the cultists then dig up the body, behead her. We eventually find out she's been decapitated. And at that time, then it would appear that it went into Charlie. Right. But as the readings, one thing about this movie that's amazing is it gives you all this, and this movie's amazingly light on exposition. Like you've got to go like figure this stuff out. So then Charlie gets beheaded. She gets beheaded. The mom does a seance. We see Payman come into her, right? And even if he's not there, even if he's not controlling all the time, he's there. How does he eventually end up in Peter? She saws her own fucking head off in a brutal moment of film. That
is so good, and so terrifying. And
the shock factor of the head being knocked off by a light post is one thing, but the visceral like reaction of watching someone saw their own head off,
and it's your mother,
yeah. And so then once her head comes off, he jumps out the window, and now it's in him, right? And then we get this whole story of the fact that Charlie was Payman, but it was a lesser body, and they had to come up with a way to correct that. And so many of those things are rooted, and I've taken just a really long way around to say this. All of this is rooted in so much great research that this movie just begs for another watch and another watch. And it can be hard to do. I learned that last night. Like, I'm thinking this stuff isn't going to affect me. I know it's coming. No, it's still hard to watch some of this stuff. And like, if you're watching us live, you keep seeing me look down to my right. It's because I've just got just a notebook just full of, like I said, I look, it's very, like I said, it's very a beautiful mind over here. There's lines all over and through things. And this has all just been banging around in my head all day. But there's such a beauty to this idea. We go back to The Exorcist, like that demon entered her unwillingly. And so there was an invitation, but not in the way that she thought. There we go. Yeah. Right. Because she plays with Captain Howdy, right? Yeah, that's right. And that's enough for it to happen. And one of the things that strikes me about this second watch, right? I noticed that Annie was wearing that pendant with the sign of Payman at the funeral. And she mentions to Steve later on, she was like, oh, the pendant that my mother gave me, right? If your mother, you've had this like strained relationship at best, right? And you know that she had this secretive life. Why? Right. Why would you be wearing this thing that you have no idea what it means, where it comes from? It's obviously cryptic, So is there a sort of invitation, because there was an invitation when she does the seance, right? She very clearly invites Payman into her house. Yes. And so which begs the question of, if it wasn't Charlie first, right, then when did that moment of invite come? But then you get this bit of backstory about how when she was pregnant with Charlie, she decided to make her mother a part of her life again. And so you start to wonder, when you look at this idea of invoking demons, you look at the concept of being inside the circle and ending up when you look into magical rites and the idea that you invoke a demon, one of the reasons that you use a circle is it creates a magical barrier between you and whatever you're evoking or invoking. And so, but you also run across when you're looking at higher demons, like with ones that have names, like a King Payman, then you look at the idea of once they're there, they don't want to go back from from wherever they came from, and they will talk and they will lie and they will do all of these things. King Payman is regarded as being a teller of truth, and one of the reasons that he was so often evoked is because you could ask him questions and you could believe what he said. He was a deliverer of knowledge, and so what the question that I kept banging around in my head was whether or not, in an attempt to gain this knowledge, if the grandmother's the one who invoked him, if Charlie ended up being part of the deal, and if it's this concept of if it's a child, can she, especially if she was brought in when the mom was still pregnant, like this idea of promising something that doesn't exist yet, right? Like the baby is there, but it's not born yet. So can you promise a child at some point as part of your invocation ritual? And so
and then this child is not male.
Right. And then which really just, kind of fucks with the process. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why it becomes this whole process of getting from her to, but has to see, because the thing is, we find out that at the end, when Peter comes back and he jumps out the window, or Alex, excuse me. No, Peter. Alex is his real name.
Yeah.
Alex is his real name.
Yeah.
When Peter comes back and he immediately, he does that tongue clicking, and you're like, oh shit, he's Charlie, right? So then that amazing disembodied voice that ends the movie that you never see a face attached with, and then when they do bring the camera out, you don't see anybody like standing and facing him that looks like it should be in a position where you're talking to him while he just stares into the camera. But that voice says, you are now Charlie, and we've corrected the fact that you were put into this lesser body, which leads me to believe that Charlie was the deal. And then when Charlie was female, it had to set into place this sequence of events for Payman to become Charlie, and then Payman Charlie to become Peter, right?
Yeah.
Like these things had to happen, but Peter wasn't going to, just outwardly invite the demon in. So he had to be broken. He had to be tortured and watch his family die in front of him.
There actually is this moment, and interestingly, I didn't notice it the first time I saw it, which was on my living room television, which is 4K curved screen. It's rather large, real nice. I was watching it upstairs this time around on like a 1080p. It's like a 10-year-old television, right? And I noticed that you see a black outline leave his body once he slams down on the floor.
Yeah.
It's just a shade. And I was like, holy fuck, how did I not catch that the first time?
Yes.
He is gone. Peter does not exist in that body anymore.
Yes.
And that's what finally allows Charlie / Payman to finally come in.
Right. And so this idea that it's still Charlie, but it's also Payman, is what leads me to believe that the still unborn Charlie was part of her deal with bringing Payman over, which is something that, I was reading earlier today about a rite of summoning for Payman. And if Payman is summoned and he shows up by himself, like it almost immediately demands a sacrifice to get somebody else there to rein him in. Because if you don't get someone else there who's equal to or better than him, then you're fucked. And that's like a documented, rite of summoning Payman. So it's God, like I said, it was now that the pure shock of what I was going to see had worn off, going into this movie and watching for that stuff and just kind of letting all of that wash over me. And like I said, I'd read words and I'd see things and I was like, oh wait, I need to go grab this book. I need to go grab that book. Like, I'm sitting here with 3 books right now that I've been poring over all day. And it was like, it just sparked it in me. And so it's absolutely incredible. The the use of not only, like I said, like you said, something real, something that exists outside the universe of this movie, regardless of what you believe in.
Yeah.
You know, like this is all real mythos, and it is very real to some people.
Right.
And so the idea of putting that in there, and also not treating you like an idiot or forcing you to sit down and learn about a bunch of, like, maybe you do
it
just
doesn't
want to
spoon feed anything to you.
Maybe
and
you do just want to enjoy it and like, oh shit, she cut her head off. That's crazy. And if that's what you're in for, and you can watch it and you can enjoy that. Or if you want to be like, what is all of this? Like, that whole world is out there for you.
I have a feeling that the A24 crowd tends to be a little bit more,
Yes.
let me research this, right? It's not exactly the Dimension Films crowd that's like, you know, did they change Michael's mask? I don't care. He's stabbing that one over there.
Yeah,
she got bigger boobies than the other one. So, but yeah, I think the use of those words is so brilliant, and it shows you how, like clockwork, the machination of this cult is, that the first word that you see, Satoni, is to bring life from death.
There we go. Yeah.
And that is exactly what happens throughout the entire movie. You know, Ellen is present throughout the entire movie, and she's dead, right? Charlie's life is put to use after she's dead, right? Until then, she's just a host body.
Yep.
Right. And then Peter finally, you know, serves the purpose that he initially was supposed to. In fact, the purpose that Annie's brother was initially supposed to serve.
Yes.
Right? Which we come to find out his name was Charles.
Right.
When she's pulling out those floor mats, right? She pulls out Annie and she pulls out Charles. And it's like, oh shit, hang on a second. So Charlie was supposed to be that new Charles.
Yeah.
Right. I can't say anything more on it than you already have. I mean, you've covered it so perfectly. You know, it would be stupid of me to try to add on to that.
It was amazing. And like I said, when viewed through that lens, this movie from that first word can be viewed as one large summoning rite, which is just unbelievable to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked a lot about the characters and the story and all of that, but the characters in this movie were brought to life by, you know, the actors who really bought it. You know, Toni Collette she got widespread acclaim for this. People loved her in this role. So what do you think about, you know, Toni Collette and everybody's acting? Like, what are the standouts for you here?
I mean, Toni Collette gives the performance of a lifetime in this. It's beautiful. It's terrifying. I think that she is one of those unsung heroes of horror. She hasn't made too many horror movies. She's done this and Krampus, which are certainly horror movies. But I would consider The Sixth Sense to have elements of horror.
Sixth Sense, yeah.
And that was one hell of a performance she gave in that movie as well. And she kind of lends some credence to the horror genre, I think, in the same way that like Ellen Burstyn did for The Exorcist.
Right.
You know? When you have an Academy Award nominated actress in your movie, you know, that tends to do something there. But Gabriel Byrne, I mentioned this earlier, his performance is so tortured. So absolutely tortured. There's this amazing moment after the incredible dinner scene, right, where Annie has just blown up on Peter because Peter wants absolution.
Yes.
Right. He's begging for absolution. I don't know if Peter was looking for his mother to say it's okay, or if Peter was looking for his mother to explode and
Right.
finally let it all out. But he was looking for something. He wanted her to at least address it with him, right? And after her blow up, Gabriel Byrne reaches over and he kind of like holds his hand tight, and he comes back. He breathes this like sigh. He goes to cut his chicken. He stops. He goes to cut the chicken again, and then he just puts the utensils down and sits up straight. And it was this moment of such real, total loss.
Yeah.
It's like I have, there is nothing I can do for my family. He is totally, utterly helpless, and unhelpful. There's nothing he can do to ease Annie's suffering, to ease Peter's suffering. Just moments before, when he sees her, creating the diorama for the accident. He had been so supportive and patient up until that moment, and then he still doesn't lose control, but he's like, come down and eat, stay up here, whatever. I don't give a shit.
Right.
It's just it's tart. It's like a little bit of hate thrown in there, right? He's starting to hate her, but there's something behind it. There's still some love there. It's a brilliant performance, and I mean, Peter is just
Alex Wolff just absolutely slayed this. Like when it first, it's funny. I just recently watched both of the Jumanji movies, the newer ones, where he has, like I say a bit part. I mean, technically he's a main character, but you only actually see Alex Wolff as that character a little bit in each movie. But what you get from him in this movie is such an amazing depiction of what it must be like to be so racked with guilt and grief at the same time that nothing means anything. Right? Like you watch him as this, like when it first starts, he's this guy like smoke weed and hang out with his friends and cut class, and he wants to like hit on, he's like hitting on girls and stuff like that. And then just typical high school stuff. And
right.
And then after that moment, like you're just watching like a broken, empty human being who can't get any, like you said, he can't get any absolution from home because his mother has completely withdrawn. Like I said, his father's method of grief seems to be to just keep rowing, right? Somebody's got to keep life moving forward. And so you can't, it's not something that if you're in high school, you can't go to your friends about that and be like, hey man, can you relate to the fact that I killed my sister?
Right.
Like,
there's
nowhere to go with that, especially as a 17-year-old. Like when I was 17, if something awful had happened to me, I wouldn't have been like, oh, let me find a support group. Like none of that means anything to a 17-year-old. Like, tomorrow doesn't exist to a 17-year-old.
Right.
And so now not only has he gone from a place where tomorrow doesn't matter to, you look at him and you're like, this is a kid who hopes tomorrow doesn't come, because tomorrow's another day where he has to live with what he's done. And all of this is so amazingly portrayed in what Alex Wolff brought to this role. And like the scene where he's like first, kind of when he's being puppeted, essentially, and his arm shoots up and it's all just at that weird angle, and then he just smashes his own face into the desk. And I mean, just like the physicality of some of his acting, down to the very last, the second to last shot, where, like I said, it's just him blankly staring into the camera while you listen to this disembodied voice give you that last little bit of like, all right, if you haven't figured everything out, like, here's kind of how here it is. And he's just sitting there, and it's not a grin, it's not a grimace, it's just taking it all in, and like somebody had put this
It's
crown on his head.
confidence.
Yeah.
It's confidence.
Yeah. And yeah, he's got this crown on, and he's looking, and he goes from this person who's just racked and riddled with all of these awful things to, without saying a word, it's like, man, this guy's a king, and he knows he's a king. Like he's looking down on all of these, cultists and disembodied beheaded bodies,
Right.
And he's like, yeah, those are my people. They did this for me because of who I am. That's me. And he does all of this without saying a word. It was incredible.
Yeah. I the other thing that he really is incredible. One of the things that I loved about him was that transition from trying to be cool teenager to scared, helpless child.
Yeah. With the panic attacks and stuff. And
with
the
panic attacks.
Reverts to saying mommy.
Yeah, he the first time that you really see it, I think, is when he's smoking with his buddies after his sisters died. Millie, what's the character's name? Charlie. Thank you. Wow, I've been saying Charlie this whole fucking time. Don't drink too much water, kids. So after Charlie's died, right, he's smoking, and then he says the same thing she says, right? My throat feels like it's getting bigger.
Yes.
Right. And then he's saying, I can't breathe. And then he turns to the guy next to him. He says, just hold my hand. Right. Yeah. Like that's such a little kid response to pain, like just be there for me. Right. And when he starts to feel scared at the seance, he cries.
Yes.
And it's not like a tear running down his face and he's standing there stoically. It's not John Wayne at the end of The Searchers. This is a child who is terrified.
Yes.
And is bawling. He is crying his eyes out. And when she is banging her head in the most terrifying, maybe the most terrifying shot of the whole movie,
without a doubt, that image of her like stuck to the closed attic door, and he's screaming, and you think she's just banging on it, and then it cuts down, and you see she's slamming her head on it. Oh,
that he's sitting there and he's crying. And he goes, "Mommy, I'm sorry, Mommy, I'm sorry."
Yes,
he has fully reverted. I've got goosebumps just thinking about that.
Me
scene
too.
Again. He has fully reverted to a little boy. He is like you said, he's totally broken at that point. And maybe that's who he always was. There are clearly lots of problems in the Graham family.
Yes.
Lots of undiscussed issues. They need therapy.
Yeah.
They can't get it. They're all either roasted and toasted, or missing a couple of heads.
Yes.
But they need to talk their shit out.
Yeah.
It is therapy is important, ladies and gentlemen.
Therapy is important.
Yeah.
So. It's just, like I said, there's so many little things. Like I said, I didn't even like when you just described the scene with Gabriel Byrne to me. I was like, God, I didn't even think about it like that. But now looking back on it, it's like, God, it's just masterfully done.
And I think a lot of that goes to the fact that there's good material, right? This is an incredibly written piece of artwork.
Yes.
Ari Aster wrote, directed. This is his baby. His control of dialogue, of tone, of camera, like everything. Ultimately, this is his movie. As much as Toni Collette gives the performance of her career, as much as the real life demonic adds to this movie. This is him.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on this? Both when you first saw this, seeing it again Now, what do you take away from this from like the technical aspect of this?
So, first thing that I thought upon my first watch was like, how did how does somebody come up with this? Right? Like it's
Yeah, like how fucked up do you have to be?
you occasionally watch a horror movie where there's like one scene where it's like, man, whoever thought of like this particular method of death has like a really fucked up like sense of humor or something, right? And so often you can draw those lines through like these, a couple things. It's like, how did you come up with this? But when I watch this movie and the story that's told, I can only imagine that the brain of Ari Aster has got to work on like a Lovecraftian level, hopefully without the racism, right? Like,
There is definitely a Lovecraftian angle to the story,
and so that's my first thought. My second thought is there are some really fucking cool technical like camera shots in this. The two that spring to mind immediately are the very first one where you start with the dollhouse and then you come in to a bedroom on this miniature and then you're in the real bedroom.
Yeah.
Right. Like that was just beautifully done. But the one and it happens twice in each direction. The one thing that it's so minute, but it's just another moment that keeps you from getting comfortable. There's a scene in this movie where it's just a shot of the house and it's like the middle of the day. And then blink of an eye, it's the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And that shot for me, it just serves to keep you so uncomfortable. And then they do it again to go from they do it from day to night and from night to day. They do it one time each. And it's such a small thing. But it's so unnatural that it's disconcerting. We're used to fading in and out of things. And so this idea
those
of
hard cuts.
Yes, there's this idea of just something suddenly changing is so unnatural. It makes you so uncomfortable. Like those types of directorial decisions are what just floor me about this movie.
That very first shot of the movie was impressive, but it was also concerning for me because I saw great potential for, and not really knowing Ari Aster's work, I had no idea what to expect. But I thought this had great potential to be a Wes Anderson style movie,
right?
And I am not a fan of Wes Anderson.
Me either.
He's got a style that is definitely his own.
Yep.
And that is fantastic because very few filmmakers have such an easily identifiable style.
Yep.
You can watch one frame of a Wes Anderson movie and know exactly.
Oh yeah, like the first time I saw a trailer for what's the new one, The French Dispatch or whatever. Like as soon as the trailer started, I went, "Ooh, this is from the mind of Wes Anderson."
Right. Even when it's not live action, even when it's a cartoon, it's like, oh, that's a Wes Anderson movie. So I was a little concerned because I was like, oh, that's really cool. But I was also like, oh, is he a Wes Anderson clone? And he is not. Nope. He is definitely not. His use, however, of her miniatures, particularly the house, to represent them, the Grahams, is masterful. Particularly in how we're talking about like the Lovecraftian feel of this movie, right? For those of you, for the listeners unfamiliar with H.P. Lovecraft, his brand of horror, often called Lovecraftian horror or cosmic horror.
Yeah, talk about having a style of your own. Like, yeah, it's so indefinable. They just give it your name.
Yeah,
like discovering a new disease.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's Hitchcockian. You just put your name and then En at the end.
Yeah,
and then it's Debona En. So he had this brand of horror that made the reader feel utterly helpless and totally alone and unimportant in in the universe, in on this planet, and even within our own home and to ourselves.
Yes.
So this movie does this, and it all goes back to his script, and partly to his extensive research in Payman, but also in simply his approach to genetics and family trauma, and how utterly helpless we are to all of that. We are all in one way or another our parents, even if we're not, right?
Right.
Because I from my parents I learned precisely what to do as a parent and what not to do as a
Yeah.
parent, right? um and I thank them for that, uh both the good and the bad, because I feel like it taught me a lesson, and it's made me a better parent than they were for me. And I know that they learned from their parents, and they were better parents than their
Yep.
parents were for them, and so on and so forth. But that trauma is relayed from one to the next, and I know that there are things that I'm doing that will affect my son, and that he'll do for his children, and so on and so forth. It's this totally helpless feeling, and that Lovecraftian horror of I can't outrun my family history, I can't outrun my trauma, my family trauma. It's absolutely brilliant. The performance that he got out of these actors, these were not like one take shots.
Right.
He was definitely nowhere near Stanley Kubrick, doing hundreds of takes. But they were doing, 14, 15 takes of certain scenes. And, particularly for Alex Wolff and for Tony Collette, they gave very physical performances. Uh, that was very demanding, and he got incredible performances out of them. But there's also such an incredible, mature control of the camera that you don't often see. Horror movies so often fall back on the chaotic,
Yes.
right? Shaky cam, like action movies have been doing for the last 20 years, right? These hard cuts and hard edits where you don't exactly see exactly what's going on, things being too dark, right? Ari Aster doesn't lean on that. He puts it all out there for you, and really for most of the movie, what we get are slow tracking shots, slow dolly shots, or totally static shots.
Yes.
It allows the tension to build so beautifully. And I think when a director writes, you really get that he really comes to know the material, and he knows exactly what is supposed to happen in that scene in a way that a director who doesn't write simply doesn't have. And if you look at the great writer director, um you know filmmakers out there, someone like a Quentin Tarantino, right? You see that he knows exactly what that scene is supposed to be,
Right.
versus Quentin Tarantino written movies that are directed by someone else. I'm a huge fan of what's the one with Christian Slater? um
True
True
Romance.
Romance. True Romance. Yeah, brilliant movie. Absolutely love it. Uh doesn't necessarily feel like a Quentin Tarantino
Right.
movie, though, right? The dialogue is definitely Tarantino, but that doesn't feel like a Tarantino movie. Something's lost there, right? And you kind of see it when a director doesn't write his own material, even when he usually does as well. There's a little something that's lost there. So to me, ultimately, this is him. It's his masterpiece, and for this to be a debut film, I can't think of another director where their first movie was so strong and so perfect in every possible way, because there are directors that were hampered by budget, hampered by editing, hampered by the studio, by this, by that. Even Steven Spielberg, you can't say Jaws is his first movie. Sure, it's his first feature film, but you've got Duel and Sugarland Express that were done before it. So it's his first big budget movie,
Right.
And you can't say that Duel and Sugarland Express are perfect. They're great, but they're not perfect. This is perfect.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to him.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, which is going to take us right into, it's time to rate this one. So if you're new to the podcast, one thing that we always like to remind everybody is that we rate a movie solely against itself for the most part. So when we were talking about this movie, we like to we come up with a unique rating system. And if you listen to this or you listen to Geekmore, you may know that on top of being horror movie guys, Dave and I are big music guys, and we like our music with an edge. And so, in an attempt to keep this,
which is not a U2 reference, although I am a U2 fan.
You can take them or leave them, right? I like Joshua Tree.
Yeah, their early stuff.
So, in an attempt to just really grab this bull by the horns and embrace the fact that we have an opportunity for the most metal rating system that we may ever get to use, out of a possible 5 Kings of Hell, how many do you give this movie, Dave?
I'm wondering how many over 5 is too much. That's this. When I first saw this back in 2019, I immediately fell in love with it. And like I said, this is only the second time I've seen it because I've been afraid to go back to it.
Yes.
It's a difficult movie to watch. Toni Collette's scream of horror and pain when she discovers Charlie is the stuff of nightmares.
Also, amazing directorial decision to keep that off camera, to experience what it was like for Peter to lay there and hear it. Oh,
yeah. It's hard to watch. I don't often find myself in the mood to relive this because of how difficult it is to watch. But this is a perfect movie. And so far the highest rating that we have given has been 6 out of 5.
Yes.
I can't remember
Candyman.
For Candyman. Yeah. And this is at least as perfect as Candyman. And I know we've talked about degrees of perfection before.
Yes.
I'm going to give this 7 out of 5 Kings of Hell.
Yeah. Forwards, backwards, inside out. This movie is perfection. This entire recording, I have gotten chill bumps multiple times going back through some of this stuff and remembering it. You are left in a place to not only experience the movie, but to feel the movie. They ground it in so much reality that even when things do get supernatural, it all feels so real. And it's palatable. Is that the right word? Right. It's palpable. Like palpable. There we go. Yeah. You can, palatable would mean it tastes good. It's palpable.
Probably wouldn't taste very good. No.
Yes. This is the feeling. This movie is the feeling I got the first time that I read The Shining. Right. Mm-hmm. This movie is. This movie is just it. But you're right. It's hard to rewatch. It takes a piece of you with it, which is, sounds bad. But I mean, if the point of art is to evoke some sort of reaction, right? Like this evokes such a reaction that you're not ever quite the same. after you watch this. Like there's a small piece of you that's left when those credits are done. Like,
oh yeah,
I know. Like Marvel has trained me when I go see something in the theater to watch through the credits. But I mean, this is a movie where I just let the credits roll because I needed that moment.
You need a process.
Like, I needed a decompress. And you're absolutely right. This is at least as perfect as Candyman. And so yeah, I'll go right there with you. I mean, this is a 7 out of 5 Kings of Hell. This is this is just put a TV screen up in the Louvre and just play this movie on a loop.
It is art. It is moving art.
It's just so, like, I went into this after seeing it once and I was like, yeah, let's get to talking about this. I'm ready to give it 5. And after another rewatch, I was like, I can't just give it 5. Like, this is a movie that raises the bar on what can be done with a horror movie. You can go and you can find a genre and you can find movies that are keystones, that are landmarks in that genre's history. But you can also find movies that make the world aware of what can be done within this genre. And that's what Hereditary did. Hereditary took a genre that has gone all over the place. And not that there haven't been art films that are horror films, but it took it and it made it high art. It took it and Hereditary took the genre of horror and made it into something that this is a you can't ignore us movie. You can sit around and you can laugh at the ones that are laughable, but you can't ignore this genre's place in filmmaking. And this takes that and runs with it. So I'm right there with you. This is absolutely a 7 out of 5.
Yeah. It kind of has to be, you know, and you're right. I think that this is one of those landmark movies in horror. I think you've got The Exorcist, you've got maybe Scream, or Halloween, Scream, The Conjuring,
Psycho,
and this Psycho. Obviously before Exorcist,
right?
I do think that this solidified that trend of art house horror that we're seeing a lot now. I don't think it started it. I think Under the Skin was the one that kind of really birthed that.
Yeah.
And I personally loved Under the Skin. I know that that's another one that's very divisive. And it's not just because Scarlett Johansson's naked for a good portion of the movie. I truly did like
there's
this
a solid
movie.
piece of that pie chart that's naked Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah. I didn't say it wasn't because of it. It just wasn't the only reason. But I think that kind of started this trend of the art house horror, and Ari Aster kind of like put his stamp down on it, and he's like, motherfucker, we're doing this. And you can be here for it or you can't, doesn't matter,
but you can't ignore it
because we're indie and we don't need you to do it, because we've got studios like A24 backing it and doing it, and they're finding the right directors to make these movies for close to nothing.
Yeah, I mean, this was made for $10 million, which, yes, is a lot of money to a normal person like us and the people listening. But for a movie budget, 10 million is what you pay one actor for a big movie,
right? And so I think Ari Aster has really shown us what you can do in horror with this. And next week, hopefully, we'll see what he can continue to do with horror.
Yeah, exactly.
With Midsommar,
what he decided the next step would be.
Yeah. So I'm excited to discuss that one with you, Daniel.
Yeah. I'm excited to watch. It's been one I've been meaning to watch since I saw Hereditary and just kind of never got it. It was one of those things when I had the time, it didn't pop into my head, and so now I'm excited to sit down and watch.
Now, let's discuss this now with the listener, right? Do you want to discuss next week the director's cut or the theatrical cut?
Oh, there's two cuts?
Yes.
I Let's go directors, right? Director's cut
Okay.
is usually more in line with what the original, the original imaging was. So let's go director's cut.
And I believe that for Midsommar, it was purely a timing issue. The movie was just going to be too long. So they were like, yeah, we got to cut it. And he was like, okay. So so there you go. Thank you so much for watching. Those of you who came in and watched live. Thank you for listening. Those of you who are dedicated listeners in the podcast verse, we implore you to please follow the other podcasts on the Geek Bro Network, including the Mount Geekmore podcast, which both Daniel DeBona and myself are on. What's Up, Bro? Seasons. Better Let Me Tell You, Kick Flicks,
Crimacopia.
Fitness, Crimacopia. Crimacopia, I think, fits very well with Shiver.
Yes.
I'd like to think of it as our sister podcast.
Yeah, it really is. It's here's real world horror.
Right. Right. Kind of what the actual fuck episodes used to be back in the day. So did I miss any? I think I got them all. Right?
I think Dosavelli. Did we say Dosavelli?
Dosavelli? Yeah, there you go.
Is still around. And so, and you can head to geekbro.net. You can find all of those, that extensive list. Or you can
There's probably a lot of really angry parents. You're poisoning the minds of my children over here.
We can only hope.
Yeah, we can only hope.
We can only hope. We just seek to bring light to what you would keep in the darkness.
We should put that as our tagline. Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We shine a light on what you would keep in the darkness.
There we go.
Yeah, kind of long, but I think it works on a movie poster.
It's gonna be a big tattoo, but I'll get there.
I'll put it right on the back. It's a big canvas. So there you go. On behalf of all of us here on the Shiver podcast, fright you very much.